Okay, hi everyone. Good to see everyone again. And today is the conclusion of our onboarding session. And we're really going to go over best practices so we can all be better informed as to our duties of care, obedience, and loyalty. So without further ado, the Leadership Development Committee really created the position description for really fleshing out the job duties invoked when you join the board. So you should really use that guide, and you can always go to member clicks if you need a refresher. We're really following up on what we discussed on Tuesday. So if anyone has any questions based on what we discussed on Tuesday, you can offer them now. And during the presentation, if you want to raise your hand in the reaction or put something in the chat, then Sally and I will do our best to be paying attention and be mindful of that as well. So on this slide, we're really going to start with best practices for director responsibility. I think we can go to the first slide next.
Yes, just a second. I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody seeing the board members are responsible for?
No. Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait, just give me 1 second. It's like we're having problems here.
Is it the heat, Sally?
No, it's the smoke. We're not even that hot here. This is
the clouds and the ash are covering the sky, right?
Yes. Okay. So let me do this again. No, this is I have a 6 a.m. flight tomorrow with my family, and so I'm trying to get all this work done, and this is all Sally's problem. So apologies.
Well, we all know how that feels anyway.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we're good to go.
Yep.
Okay. So
we already went through this. Yeah.
Yes, you're screwing with me now a little bit, huh?
Sorry.
On my last week on the job, right? Okay, so just a reminder, we're all on the board to prepare for monthly virtual meetings and really up to about 3 meetings in person on an annual basis. So I think most of these are sort of speak for themselves. But one of the reminders that I think we all need, and Tuesday, we talked about do not speak for FASEB unless you're authorized to do so. So remain mindful of a distinct role while you interact with the FASEB staff, comply with the policies, and of course, comply with the code of conduct. Next slide. Okay, so attendance. This is very rare that we have an issue, as Sally can attest, with directors not attending either in person or electronically at least 8 regular board meetings, and most, if not all, attend 9 out of 10 or whatever, 90% of the meetings. But in the rare occurrence when someone has missed 4 consecutive meetings without any explanation or reaching out to Sally or to the president to have resigned from the board in absentia. So next slide. So, yes, Sally?
In a different spot. I'm sorry. This is not where this is supposed to be. So give me 1 second. So am I showing the right thing?
This is a test of my last week as a media.
I know. I am so sorry. Okay. Yes.
That's okay. Just tell me where I'm supposed to be. That's all.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
So I finished that one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're fine. Okay. Okay. Sorry. I'm doing so many onboardings right now that I'm missing out. So, okay. Sorry.
So just tell me what the next slide
The
is.
next slide is the next slide. It's the board staff relationship. So I will present.
Okay, you're showing your note. Okay, good. Okay, well, we started to discuss this earlier in the onboarding as well. But essentially, if you look on the right side, you can see what the responsibilities are and the progression between the staff and the board member. And a board member can certainly come up with an idea because of what's going on in the world these days, which is a lot, and can bring that forward. But the first contact is really at the level of board leadership, meaning the president should be asked if this is something that we should consider as a board further. And then really the president will direct the strategy or the framework. This could be Frank as well, in accordance with FASEB strategic priorities, and will actually then reach into the staff, who are the administrative and facilitators par excellence, and they will clarify if there are any governance issues and provide guidance. And the next is, of course, our fiduciary responsibility, where that would be balanced at the level of the board about the stewardship of both our short and long-term financial resources. The staff then directly reports. Remember, the executive director is the staff liaison always. So the staff reports for their position as well as their responsibilities to Frank Kraus, in this case, the executive director. And then there will be a report out from the board to volunteer leadership of what was found after the discussion, the framework, and the building out of a plan, and the management and the execution of an approved budget and operating plan always defaults back to the CEO, Frank Kraus. Next. Okay, so now we have our 2 quiz questions. So board member Chris is very concerned about new laws governing abortion. Should Chris contact the science policy director to encourage a statement on behalf of FASEB? Somebody want to take that one? Marcelo?
I can say what I would do.
Go ahead.
I would contact the president and Sally about it, and Sally would tell me to contact the right person if she's not in.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll get to Vrushank in just a minute, but yes, we just want to make sure that, so it would either be me or Frank. Most of the time, if you're hoping that staff will do something, please contact Frank first, because Frank is when it says he's managing the resources, staff are considered one of those resources. So you're exactly right. I think in this situation, Chris should also contact the vice president for science policy. That would be a really good place to go, but maybe Chris has a better relationship with the president or president-elect. But basically the idea that we're reinforcing here is that you should, please don't go to staff and ask for things. They will respond because they are very, very responsive and they want to do the right thing. But we have had instances, it doesn't happen that frequently anymore, but when I first joined FASEB, there was one time where a board member requested all of the science policy actions for the past 3 years. And the science policy team just started working on it. And I had to come in and say, whoa, time out. We need to make sure that this is what we're actually doing right now, because that is a huge time resource that was being involved. So Vrushank, I saw your hand raised. Are you okay, or would you like to add to this?
Yes, I second what Marcelo said and the comments that he gave. So yeah, thank you.
So the next one is really part of the first one. He's just getting upset because the director didn't respond. So how should Chris then proceed? And I think Sally has really sort of put it in a nutshell about how he should proceed. Anybody want to add anything before we move on?
So
And-
here, it's just reinforcing that to just keep things moving effectively, working effectively, you may be upset with a staff person. Please contact Frank or one of the presidents if you feel staff didn't do something. Patricia right now should be like, Sally was late for the call and then things were messed up at the beginning. Patricia should really tell Frank that, and then it's Frank's job to talk to me about it, not Patricia. And then that just keeps everything, we're gonna have to all work together. We wanna make sure we're not burning any bridges. And staff are also informed that if they have an issue with a volunteer, they need to talk to Frank about it. And then Frank will talk to the president and the president will handle it. And I will say that sometimes I and Patricia and Lou can both attest to this. If there was a time where while they were presidents, I would contact them and say, hey, we haven't heard from this person in a long time. Can you follow up, or things like that? We don't really see a lot of egregious behavior. Don't worry about it. It's mostly, hey, so-and-so's been a little MIA. Can you check in on them? Marcelo?
I just have to say that I thank you to put that question there so we could have this discussion. But even when I was not on the board, I never had that happen to me. People are normally incredibly efficient at answering and being helpful, and just wanted to put it out there.
Yes, I think I really love my colleagues at FASEB, so I think we try our best, but we do just want to make sure that it's part of that managing resources. But thank you for saying that, Marcelo.
And certainly our structures for committees and task forces, not talking about the board right now, but you can bring up in an open mic certainly any issue that you think should be raised. And then that particular director can talk to Frank about it. And usually the president is also on the call. So at the level of the board, we always have open mic at the end of the conversation as well. So it's not like anyone is being stifled. And we do need to be extremely collegial, but also collaborative. So at the end of the day, expert staff and Frank is in charge of the staff. So we don't want to have them bend their own schedules to the kind of friendliness that every one of us experiences. So let's move on, Sally. Okay, Sally, is this yours?
Yep. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit. Now we talked about the attendance requirement, and just want to make sure everybody's on the clear. A few slides ago, if you're going to miss a meeting, it's okay. Things come up. Just let me know. It's a problem, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, if you're MIA. And just to reiterate, going back to our duty of care, showing up is the minimum level of exercising your duty of care. So if you're going to miss a meeting, please just shoot me an email and I'll note that I just put excused. We don't really have a term for it, but it means that we know that you've not gone away forever. So this is our meeting calendar for the upcoming year. All of the squares that are clear or white, those meetings are virtual. They'll be on Zoom and they'll happen at 2 p.m., usually on the first Tuesday of the month. But you'll see, we're not going to meet on July 4th, and we're not going to meet the day after New Year's. So we'll push them back a week. You will get the agenda for those meetings typically by the end of day, the Thursday before. And you will get an email and it will tell you the agenda is ready, and you will actually go to our volunteer portal to access the materials. And at the end of this session today, I'll walk you through how to do that. So you'll notice here there are a few bullet points, and those are kind of the standard things that happen during that month every year. So every September, the board approves our budget guidelines and principles. Every December, the board approves our budget and operating plan. And if we're going to have a work plan, that's when it's developed, is in December. On last Friday, we talked a little bit about the legislative calendar. So in January and February, that's typically when we start looking at FASEB funding recommendations that we will present at our Capitol Hill Day in March. Just because stuff is not listed does not mean we won't have anything to talk about. We'll typically have updates from certain programs and strategic initiatives. We almost always have items coming out of the Science Policy Committee, different RFIs and other things that we need, or comments that we need to approve. And now with our new DEAI committee, we expect that the board will be seeing those items as well. So for the in-person meetings, those agendas go out just about 2 weeks before the meeting. So you have lots of time to look things over. If you're not able to attend an in-person or one of these virtual meetings, please look over the materials. And if you have any comments, suggestions, feedback, please share that with either the president or the person who's responsible for that action item. And then finally, we do cover the travel costs associated with attending the in-person meeting. So if you want to mark your date, and I will show you at the end of this as well, where you can download some calendar appointments on our volunteer portal. Another date that's not on here, and I'll mention this later, is the board is invited to attend our in-person Science Policy Committee Symposium, which will happen on Tuesday, October 24th. Okay, there's a lot of information on this slide. Are there any questions about it? Okay. So at the board meetings, and Frank really sets the tone. He wants to make sure that this is a working board, that you're not just going to listen to staff reports when you come to board meetings. This pyramid is something that kind of governance professionals talk about modes of governance. And so this is where we try to describe the items that we're going to be presenting at each board meeting. And the levels of the pyramid indicate roughly how much time we'll spend on operational items versus generative items. So you'll see operational items, which are approving the consent agenda, approving the budget. That won't take a ton of time. But then we'll go to the budget as an example. The generative and strategic discussion with the budget will take a lot of time. So to just go through these different levels, so operational, I just mentioned, it's basically what do we have, how do we use it, facts and figures, simple motions that we can approve. The strategic items are when we're setting priorities, we're reviewing our strategic plan, or we're trying to describe a framework for how we're going to approach an issue. Policy is something special for FASEB, and you'll actually see on the PDF agendas that you can download online, where it actually says policy. And this is where we're talking about those items that are coming directly from the Science Policy Committee. We do anticipate that there's going to be policy items coming from the DEAI committee, but we may actually, next year, there may be another level to this pyramid that falls under DEAI. And then finally, generative. This is when the board decides what to decide. So especially in our in-person meetings, and I think Patricia and Lou can attest to this, we have a lot of discussion time or facilitated activities where we are really trying to get board members to think critically about different issues that FASEB is facing, and to then provide really meaningful feedback at those times. So we don't have as much time for generative items on our monthly board agendas, but definitely during our in-person meetings, we have a lot of generative time. Lou, Patricia, do you have anything to add to that, or does anybody have any questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So we've seen this slide briefly, and we're going to go into it in more detail, but I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of kind of how things bubble up from just being something a board member or a committee member is interested in to actually something that is considered by the board. So we start where an issue is identified, and this can happen a number of ways. Patricia mentioned our open mic. Often that is something where somebody at the end of the meeting, a committee meeting or a board meeting, will say at open mic, hey, has anybody heard about this? I'm concerned about it. Or this is if we get an RFI or our science policy staff see something in the Federal Register that they think FASEB should respond to. That's how our issue is identified. So this can really come from anywhere. So that's why it's blue. Staff and volunteers can do it. This may be something that arises from your society and you feel like it needs to come to the board. And just again, to reiterate here, when an issue, when you think you've thought of something or that needs to go to the volunteer leadership and or Frank. After the issue is identified, we create an action plan. So we decide how we're going to push it forward. And sometimes the board will say that a committee should investigate it further, or the board will decide that we need to form a task force to deal with it. Sometimes a board or a committee will ask staff to deal with it, or for staff to create a timeline or a framework for addressing that issue. And if we go back to that previous slide where we laid out the calendar of board meetings, this is also the time where we look at, is it something that's going to require a budget request? So then we're going to want to make sure that that gets in the calendar before December so that we can include that in the next year's calendar. Next, we have deliberation and development. This is where the committee, the task force, perhaps even the board is really figuring things out, trying to decide what should happen next. This often at FASEB involves a lot of stakeholders. We almost always put information to our executive officer advisory committee, which is all of the executive officers of our full member societies. We have a variety of special interest groups that are staff-based, that are in specific issue areas. We have a public affairs special interest group that meets every single Friday. We'll often run things by them. We have a DEAI group. We have a meeting planners group. And we want to make sure that we're being very transparent. We're getting all the feedback that we need before we actually make a recommendation. And so for those that I'm looking at Marcelo or Tom that have been on committees, this is where the committee will then vote to approve sending a policy to the board for final approval, or will vote to recommend that the board pass the budget as described. But the important thing here is when something comes out of the committee or a task force, it is a recommendation to the board, because remember from Tuesday, the board is the only one that can make that final decision on behalf of FASEB. And just another point, that anything that happens in the deliberation stage at the committee should be confidential. And then finally, the recommended action will go to the board. So if it's something coming out of the DEAI committee, Marcelo this year will present it to the board. Or if it's coming from the Science Policy Committee, it'll be Eric Kelly. Tom, when he moves into the treasurer position, will be presenting the budget to the board. So that is how those things work. And then if we have another committee or task force that doesn't have a seat on the board, we'll often invite them to come and present items as well. This often happens with our publications committee if we're presenting like a new editor for one of the journals or something. The recommendation needs to have enough information so that the board feels comfortable that due diligence was taken in making that recommendation. We do not want the board to be relitigating the work of the committee. And this is something the board always struggles with. They're always very interested, especially in science policy items, you know, wondering how a committee got to a decision. So it's really, really helpful if the person presenting this information can provide a little bit of background about what process was undertaken to make the recommendation, those sorts of things. And then it is the president's role to kind of keep the conversation on track and not starting to like rehash things. So we have executive committee here too. If something's relatively minor, like updating a committee charter, or we get a sign-on letter that's very similar to a policy that FASEB is already, the full board already endorsed, those items can go to the executive committee. And just as a reminder, all executive committee actions will be placed on a website where board members can see them. Finally, after the board approves.
Patrick has a question,
Yeah.
Sally.
So Sally, you might have said this already, but is there a formal process by which anyone submits a recommendation to the board, such as a white paper or a half-page rationale for why this recommendation is being made, so that it can be considered with premise and with documentation or, you know, background information?
We haven't done that a ton, and I don't really think that has happened since I have been here. And typically, Patrick, that's because it's run through our science policy committee for a lot of those items that would necessitate a white paper or something.
Okay.
And if it's something specific to like animals and research, it will have actually gone to another level. We will have had the animals and research subcommittee, who are truly subject matter experts in that place. They will do a lot of the legwork, then it will go to the science policy committee, then it will go to the board. So because we kind of have these things in place, we haven't needed that, but I think if something rose to that level, that is absolutely something the board could consider.
Thank you.
Okay, once the board makes a decision, that's when it needs to be communicated out. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but we want to make sure all board decisions are transparent and that we are communicating them to our member societies, to any other interested stakeholders. This is when, if we're responding to an RFI, we will post it online and submit it through the proper channels. Maybe it's a policy statement that FASEB is adopting. This is when we'll post it online. And we can talk about the rationale behind the decisions, but just a reminder, we're not going to talk about what happened during the actual deliberation. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. So I'm going to pass things back to Patricia to talk about member best practices, and I'll give one more chance if there's any more questions on what happens at board meetings.
Okay, next slide. So again, going back to that best practices that we started today's session with, one of the sort of reminders that one needs to take all the time is to be very proactive with engaging with your societies. Now, societies have a whole range of whether or not they even interact with their board members, from very robust to moderate to modest to almost none at all. So you want to be able to tell them what's going on at FASEB, talk about our programs and what is current. And as Sally indicated, we don't want to talk about confidential deliberations that are still ongoing and haven't been fully approved and vetted. So on virtual, since we live in a hybrid world, the reminder is always use the video if you can, unless you're on a very low bandwidth at that moment, and really limit distractions. Now, I mean, if you take a virtual board meeting from an airport, put yourself on mute, but pay attention. And really encourage all of the other board members, which I don't think there's been an issue in many, many years of anyone overstepping either inclusivity or respecting the other one's gender affirming language. And ultimately use the technology, the camera on, the chat function, and also the raising hands really makes the Zooming much more fluid. Next slide. Okay, so again, engaging with your member societies. Sometimes it's very difficult to schedule regular meetings, but certainly check in with them and let them know that you're being very active as their board representative. Use the promotional toolkits and disseminate them. Several of my FASEB societies have web pages where they post the most current congressional funding informatic sheets on their web page, and then they can be disseminated very easily to their members. When you can, present in-person reports. We all know board meetings or council meetings at individual societies always have a jam-packed agenda. So if you can present in person, if you're going to be at the annual meeting, that works out well. But if not, at least send them the information so that they have it to disseminate. Again, forward FASEB for you, and schedule a meeting as you begin your board service. If you feel you still need to touch base with the predecessor on your board representation to go over where they're at and where the baton is being transferred to you. Next. Okay, we're back to questions here. So Bob, a board member, learns about a DEAI fellowship application for early career members. Bob thinks younger members of his society would be interested. What do you think Bob should do? Anyone? Prashant, you have an opinion?
Sure. Maybe Bob can reach out to FASEB, get the exact flyer or information about this fellowship, and use that to submit it to his society, where it could be like advertised to members.
Marcelo, did you want to add something?
I would make sure that it's okay to communicate with the society, that the procedure has been vetted and voted, and that's actually an official position of FASEB, and then do exactly what Grushank said.
Yes, I think they're both complementary and very well on point.
And I was
So-
going to add to that, that I would want to determine whether the application is in its full and ready form, right? Because the way this is worded, it sounds as if it could just still be in an earlier stage, a conceptual form. So it has to be ready for prime time to be released.
Well, absolutely. And I think by phrasing it as an application, that
Mhm.
does imply that it's been put out there and
true.
advertised. But certainly we do want to be cautious not to get out there in front of an announcement from FASEB after all the vetting and approvals go forward. Now let's go to the second one.
So can I add a little bit more, Patricia?
sure.
So yeah, everybody is absolutely right. And like me authoring the question, I should have been a little bit more specific, but it's important to note that FASEB's staff, we don't have email addresses for like every individual society member. So the only way that we can communicate with like the regular member of your society is through liaison. And our board members, our SPC members, our DEAI members, you are those people. And so we do try to get this kind of information out to the executive officers, to the staff at your member societies that we have contact information for. When a program like this is done, we put together a promotional toolkit and we will share that with board members. And we really hope that you will then send that to your society. And I will say that I see the applications that come in for like the early career representative positions, other things like that. And you can tell which board members are doing this outreach by the applications that are coming in. So it really benefits the members of your society by being an active liaison in this way.
And just the final, if you really want to be on top of it and you're on social media, for example, FASEB org has a Twitter account, and generally any application such as this one or an announcement of award applications or even policy statements, if you follow FASEB on Twitter, for example, then you can retweet that very easily and you'll know that it's ready for prime time because FASEB tweeted it out. Okay, so as a FASEB board member, Claire receives the Washington update and FASEB for you. Should Claire share this information with her society? Somebody want to answer and say why or why not? And if yes, who should she include?
I see
Okay, Christian, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I guess, one of our responsibilities, right? To bring these in and present all this. And to who, I guess, in my case, we have the executive committee and our board. So send it to them and let them distribute it further through email or whatever, so that everyone's aware of what's happening at FASEB.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the who really depends on your society. I think some societies have newsletters where it's easy to kind of send this sort of information to, that sort of thing. So it's really going to depend on the infrastructure of your member society to know the best way to send it. But yes, these Washington Update is something you can sign up for. FASEB for You, we send to all current volunteers every quarter. And we try to focus that specifically on what is the benefit to the average society member of FASEB. So the more broadly you can share that, the better for FASEB.
Okay. Thank you. I think the last one I preemptively already answered myself, but Bob will be attending his society's annual meeting where he knows that the council will be meeting. It's usually in advance of the annual meeting start. Should Sam try to get time on their agenda to provide FASEB updates?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you are interested in doing that, please contact staff and we, so talk to Frank, and then Frank will ask staff to help get slides together. There might be an officer who's also attending that meeting, so we might get them to present as well. But we are very, very happy to support any of these efforts in any way that you need. And
But
Patricia
again,
is great at
Yes,
doing
Frank. What? I'm sorry.
I said
what?
Patricia's great at doing these presentations.
Oh, yeah, I got my bag and I carry and I go. And it's a great way to make it sort of very current for them and make them feel really a part of their membership dues in action. And you can field questions as well. It's always okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. But the staff under Frank's direction will always prepare a slide deck, which is really current and has most of the answers right on the slide. It's very easy to do. Okay, next slide. Okay, I think this is you, Sally.
Yes, so now we're going to get into the tricky part, which we kind of previewed on Tuesday. So your role as a society representative versus being a FASEB fiduciary. Christian, I feel your hand up. Do you have a question, or you just need to? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
So except for officers and our early career representatives, in which we talked a little bit about on Tuesday, you're all appointed by a society. And then you represent that society on the FASEB board. However, what we talked about on Tuesday, when it comes time to making a decision, you must vote for what's best in FASEB's interest. And this is because of that fiduciary responsibility you have to FASEB. You absolutely can and should use the experience of being a well-established member of your society to provide insights into topics, especially if there will be some topics that are much more relevant to your member society than others, and we really need to hear their perspective on that. But you do not have a representational role. You are not voting on behalf of your society on the FASEB board. So you are a representative of your society, not for your society. So, and that's reiterated here. That was the statement I was trying to remember the other day. And as Frank mentioned it, and we'll move on to this next slide. You can talk about your society during the discussion, but when it comes time to vote, it has to be in FASEB's best interest. So this slide attempts to illustrate this dual nature. So on the left side, just what we talked about with issue identification, we use society executive officers, agencies, committees and task force. Issue identification can come from just about anywhere. And then in determining how we're going to deal with that issue, we also want to be very transparent in how we're gathering that information. And we want to make sure that we're making informed decisions, and our societies and other places are going to be wonderful resources for getting that information. But just to reiterate, once the motion's on the table, the discussion will be limited to board members only. And you might remember from Friday, we talked about everybody that's invited to board meetings. There will be board meetings where there's member society executive officers in the room, or society public affairs staff, or FASEB senior staff. And they're invited to share input during the discussion phase, but then once there's a motion, that really is, at that time, it's now only time for voting members of the board to talk. And then once the decision is made, we have this culture of transparency. We're gonna make sure that it's disseminated in a timely manner. We want to make sure that even if we didn't agree with the final decision, that we are expressing that this is, on behalf of the entire board. We don't, we can't tell you not to say I disagree with it, but you should not do that if you can help it. And you can talk about what went into making that decision, but if it ever gets to, well, Patricia said this during the deliberation, that's what we do not want to do. So we can talk about the rationale behind decisions, but we don't want to talk about specifics of the deliberation. Are there any questions about this? This is the tricky part. Oh, sorry, my mouse is very touchy. This is difficult, and there will be times where Marianne or another officer will have to remind everybody to come back to the FASEB point of view, and because it is so easy to put on that society member hat and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm trying to understand. I want to see if I can get more clarity on this because I can see it being contentious at times. So if your society is completely against, entirely unanimously against a decision, how do you present the decision to them? Do you say, I did my best, or to advocate for the society, but in the end, it was a decision that was made on, behalf of the benefit of the entire, is that the boilerplate language?
I think so. I would actually ask Patricia and Lou, what do you think? Have you ever had that come up?
Who are you asking, Sally?
Oh, Patricia and Lou, like, have you had a situation where like ultimately the board voted in favor of something that you knew your society was opposed to? And how would you explain that?
Yeah, so how tight, I guess the question is, how tight-lipped do you have to be about your vote? And, or your arguments presented to the board? Do you have to keep those completely anonymous, or can you say, I advocated strongly for the society, but in the end, this was the decision made for the benefit of all societies? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough question. So I would say a couple things. Number one, I think that any discussions that go on within the context of the board itself, I think, the details of those discussions, I think, should remain within
Right.
the board.
That's
And
clear.
as a board member who has fiduciary responsibilities to FASEB, it is up to you to then, go forward and represent the opinion of the board, right? I'm not sure I'm following exactly, like, if you are saying, would you be able to go back to your home society and talk to the president or the executive director and say, well, I really lobbied against this really strongly because I know doesn't benefit our society directly. Again, I don't know that that's really appropriate. And again, the thing that's tough is when you're on the board, you have to look at this, at least in my opinion, you have to look at this from the perspective of what is best for FASEB. And sometimes that may mean that decisions that are made
I understand
they may not be
that.
relevant to your society, they may not directly benefit your society, but they are decisions that are made by the board to benefit the Federation as a whole. That's
I understand completely my role and my responsibility, but there will be some people who will push back hard, and I'm just asking for what to say in that situation. It may not be satisfactory to them in a certain conversation that this benefited the entire I don't know. So just say that and just leave the conversation there, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
I guess if I would, go ahead, Lou, you finish.
Well, to just answer quickly, yes, I think you would respond to that individual, regardless of how hard they're pushing you.
Yeah.
By saying it was the consensus of the board that this decision was the right choice for the Federation.
Okay. And not mentioning your vote, right, at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't mention an individual vote or opposition, again, in terms of the confidentiality.
Yeah.
A lot of discussion and vetting goes on until there's a board approval or a disapproval of something that's been made a motion. So I would personalize.
Clearly, I understand the confidentiality of not, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I clearly understand that I know I cannot tell anyone who voted for or against, but can I tell them how I voted? Can I tell the society I voted in your, oh no, that's wrong, right? You're saying is it?
Yeah, I think
I don't know.
that's a
That's
step
wrong.
too far now.
Yeah, right. But
Okay.
you can't tell them. So you don't even tell them what your vote is. Is that what you keep it anonymous?
Yeah, that's what I would say. Christian, do you have something you want to add here?
Yeah, sorry, I just, a small comment. A wise person I once worked with told me the advantage of having a committee is that you can shift the responsibility to the committee. So saying this was a committee decision would probably
Plausible
feel
deniability, yes.
plausible. Exactly. So, this would, I think that might be the best way to handle it.
That's
This
a
was
good way of,
committee.
I think I like that. That's a good way of putting it.
Let me just say one other thing that I think is very important to bring up in this context, and that is that in my experience with things that FASEB has done throughout its entire history that I've been involved with it, Patricia's been involved with it, the board strives very hard to not get in a situation where they are making decisions that they know will negatively impact any of the member societies. That is something that I don't think I have ever seen.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Tom again, Tom Clemens. I mean, I think this discussion is relevant right now because, as many of you know, this relationship may be tested most dramatically in the next year. It may not have happened before, but I can tell you some of the decisions that the board's going to have to make in the next year about the federation bring up this, the relationship between a board member and FASEB, and their society responsibility. And I think my feeling is once you've agreed to be a board member of the FASEB, you kind of give up a little bit to your, the society responsibility, and you're advocating for the FASEB, for the board. So I think there is a distinction to be made there, and it's going to be tested over the next year. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I like to be prepared.
Yes, I agree with that, Tom. And what Lou said, and I would add to Lou's comments as well, is I will say this, he is not paying me to say this, but one thing that Frank stresses with staff is we can never have too much feedback. And so we are going to be, and I think one thing you could say is if your society is upset about something, you say, that feedback was shared, like that feedback was heard. Like, and it is going, as I mentioned, Frank is, every decision, like even some minor ones, even we now have this Howard Garrison Advocacy Fellowship. It went to the Executive Officers Committee. It went to a development, like it has gone through many, many stakeholders to get feedback, to make sure it is something that we can get consensus on. That doesn't mean everybody's always going to be happy, but I do think it's okay to say that feedback was heard, but ultimately this was the decision that was made. And if at any point you feel like enough feedback hasn't been gathered, it is your responsibility as a board member to speak up too and say that.
Right.
And we're not all knowing, and there could be times where an officer or staff had a blind spot and just missed a stakeholder group that we should have been in touch with. And that's where you all can really help us. We need to talk to them, or we need to talk to the group.
Yeah, we can always postpone a vote on something to gather that more evidence. And I'll just speak for Lou and I, that we have come through one other contentious time in the past where there was a lot of disagreement, a lot of issues in terms of getting our federation societies all in a row, as it were, in agreement and happy with how we move forward. So it does happen, and I think we can both attest to the fact that FASEB came out much stronger on the other side of that, which took quite a bit of discussion and evidence as well.
Yeah,
So
Patricia,
Tom, I think we're encouraged going forward.
you were reading my mind. I was thinking of that very same time period. And the one thing I want to add to what Patricia said is that how we came through that difficult time was because of board members who were willing and able to speak up. And they did it respectfully, but they did it forcefully. And because of their, passion and their clarity of thinking about how we were doing what we needed to do, that's how we got through it, was the board members. And so I think for all new board members, it's been said, it's your responsibility and your right to speak up.
Hey, Sally, back to you.
Yeah, so I think we've actually hit a lot of these discussion items in here. One thing I would say, you're not always going to be able to do this, but if you also hear from your society that they may be taking an action that isn't great for FASEB, please, it's kind to go both ways. You may not always be able to do, especially if you're this sometimes happens where a board member is also a fiduciary for that society. But so like item 2, like if you find out your society is thinking about dropping their membership to an associate level, please let somebody know, and we can try and talk about that. And I think we kind of hit these other ones in this discussion. So thank you all for such a good discussion right now. So before we adjourn, I just want to make sure there's no more questions. I think we've hit these. And then I'm just going to share some resources with you. So first off, you are going to be paired with a mentor from the executive committee. They will try, they may not make it because just of how the schedule is right now. We'll try to get in touch with you before the July 11th board meeting. But please use them as a resource to ask any questions or find out more information. They'll be really helpful. Also, your mentor will be instructed to get in touch with you before the first in-person board meeting. So we all know it's not always fun to be the new person in the room. So we'll try to make sure you have a buddy on that first day. And then you can always go to me or Frank with any questions. And really quick before we go, I just want to make sure everybody knows how to access the volunteer portal. So give me 1 second to pull up my browser.
And Sally, while you're pulling that up, can I just make one other point, which I'd like the members here to consider? I find, the virtual option that we're doing now is very convenient, but a lot is missed. And I think sensitive committee meetings, we're going to have a bunch of them over the next year, should be at least have the option to meet in person. You just lose so much without that personal interaction. And I know the NIH study sections are going to more of this because it's convenient and it's cheap, but you lose a lot. And I would urge that the FASEB takes that under consideration and tries to bring people together when they can.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we've, like last year, we did consider moving more meetings virtual because of budget constraints. And then we ultimately decided with the information that needs to be discussed that we need to pay the money to be in person. And so we have those 3 meetings on the calendar right now. Depending on how things move forward with the board, we may very likely add a few more. And it may be just executive committee, it may be some mixture, but things will likely change this year. But I agree, and I would actually add to what you just said. If you can make it to, if you have something that currently conflicts with an in-person meeting, but there's some way to shift it around, your presence is so incredibly appreciated at the board meeting, and it is so helpful to be at those in-person meetings.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is our volunteer portal real quick. You log in here, so because I'm the first person that used it, I don't log in with my email address, but the rest of you, you're already in the system, so you'll log in with your username as your email address. If it's the first time logging on, you'll need to go reset your password here, and then there will be prompts to do it. If you run into any problems, just contact Maribeth or I, and we'll get your password reset and get you in the system. But you will log in, and you should see your name up here. The important things for you to know about are the board agenda. So we have the June board agenda here. You will not have access to this. This is only for the board members last year. But by the end of the day, next Thursday, the board agenda will be at the top of this quick link. And you will receive an email from me saying that the agenda is available. If you scroll down all the agenda items, the desired outcome, and the attachments are here on this page. If you prefer to download and print, we'll have a PDF version at the top of the page for you as well. Here, this little Zoom bar is messing things up for me. So then the other items over here in these quick links, you won't be able to see all of these things because this is my admin view, but we do our values and policies, including conflict of interest policy, volunteer code of conduct, that's there. You can find lists of our member societies. You can find, it's called constituent directory because we don't have a FASEB directory, but this is where if you're curious about some other person's email address, you can always email me and I'll get it to you, but you can look them up here. Down here is our upcoming events, and these can be downloaded right onto your calendar. So we mentioned earlier that board meetings are open to all board members, which is 32 people, public affairs staff from our member societies, FASEB senior staff, and FASEB society executive officers. So the list is way too big to have me send Outlook appointments. But if you click on one of these links, you can download it. You can click here and you can download these appointments directly on your calendar. Also, we have this My Society tab. If you're ever curious about who are the other volunteers from your specific member society, you can find that here, but you do have to be logged in here. We will include videos for these art orientation things under resources here. And you can find all the information about all the different committees under this tab. So are there any questions?
So Patrick wants to ask one.
Yeah, so you said that it would probably be a good idea for me to meet with my predecessor prior to the first meeting, but is that enough? Should I reach out to the leadership of my society and ask what is topical for them that might have arisen since this predecessor was on the board?
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful idea. I will say too, you've got it a little bit easy because Eric Kelly is your predecessor and he is still on the board, so it'll be a little bit easy for you to do. But yeah. I think that's a great idea. Okay. You should have all gotten a calendar appointment from me today that Mary Ann is going to present to each of you more information on what Tom alluded to, the concept coming out of our Future Focus Task Force. But your predecessor can kind of give some background on that as well. Yes, so I think your society and or your predecessor, I would probably start with your predecessor, but it's really dependent on societies. Some societies are very engaged with what FASEB is doing, some aren't.
Okay, thank you.
And Rushank, if you want contact information for the other early career representatives, please let me know and I can get that for you. I think that will be a wonderful resource for you.
Yes, I was going to email
I think
you.
Shree's ready for the Shree Tom boot camp coming up.
And Brendan Boyce is also a friend of mine, so I've talked to him.
Oh, good.
So that's good.
Yes, that's wonderful. And then Christian Holly will be a wonderful resource. And then Lauren and Marcelo, LV and I are always here to help you guys. Lauren and Marcelo are definitely since they're inaugural officers in these roles, they're really going to have their work cut out for them, but we'll be here to support them and make sure their terms are successful.
Great job onboarding. That was really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize for being a few minutes late and having technical glitches this morning. Yes.
That makes us all feel very human, so don't worry about it at all.
Okay.
So
I agree.
In closing,
Thank
I
you.
wish everyone good luck. You'll enjoy your time on the board. I hope you participate as you can and fully. And I think you'll learn a lot as well on the board. And I know that I have enjoyed it, learned, and participated. So you know, it's great to see you all ready to launch into your board duties, and Tom into his position, as well as Marcelo and Lauren. So welcome all and good luck, and I will see you at the next in-person meeting or virtual.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.